now. So welcome to the last session, a panel discussion session at Tokenomics 2021. And again, for the panelists, I wish I could welcome you physically at NYU, but still we're confined to Zoom. At least it makes travel easier. So we can have Maria from Paris, from France, joining us very easily. So this is a panel on the importance of interaction between fields. And we have 5 great panelists. They have all went outside of the immediate fields. They have connected between different fields. Their path very often is quite interesting and varied. You know, we will be specifically talking about research in blockchain. So how important it is to go across those fields and disciplines in the blockchain research and crypto research. I am going to start by brief introduction of each one of you. I am not going to do justice in this introduction, because if I wanted to do justice, then we would spend most of the time talking about you instead of hearing from you. So I will just emphasize why I think you know, you're here in this tokenomics conference in particular, rather than the full set of your achievements. And I will go in alphabetical order. So I will start with Jacob. Jacob is a professor of economics at University of Chicago Booth School of Business. He came to economics from pure math area through operations research at Columbia. And aside of his academic career, his work at Microsoft Research, Yahoo Labs, and IBM. So kind of connecting those different fields. His research focuses on market design, and he's particularly interested in design of platforms that is new design of platforms that is enabled by decentralized cryptocurrencies. And I can really relate to this research interest. Maria Potop-Bucarato is a professor of computer science at Sorbonne University. Her research is around decentralized distributed systems, which includes, but is not limited to, blockchain. In fact, she has started her career and research decade before the first Bitcoin paper was, the Bitcoin white paper was published. She has a number of publications in the field, and some of them are co-authored with other computer scientists. But most importantly, she has a number of papers on the topic co-authored with economists, and especially early on when such collaboration was still rare. And she's a co-author of one of the very influential early paper on consensus mechanism in distributed system, looking at it from incentive point of view. Ken Rogoff, well, I said I'm not going to do justice in my introduction. It's not possible here. A very prominent macroeconomist, professor of economics at Harvard University, also chess grandmaster, author of many books and even more papers. His work is very important in policy setting, and he was himself very active in policy setting in his role at the Fed. And you know, with all that background, his recent research is focusing on cryptocurrencies and blockchain-related topics. Fahad Saleh, a professor of finance at Wake Forest University, his research is on economics consideration, economics aspect of blockchain design and blockchain topics in general. And Fahad have reached his PhD, has achieved his PhD at NYU. And what is really important is that this was the first dissertation on blockchain in any business school. So for me, Fahad represents the new cohort of students who actually grow up with blockchain research rather than coming to blockchain research from other disciplines. During pandemic, Fahad was the driving force. We kind of disagree about that, but I would say driving force for setting up CBER Forum, Crypto and Blockchain Economics Research Forum. And I am going to touch upon that because this is a very interesting initiative that utilizes the fact that we're confined to Zoom during pandemic, so that we can meet twice a month across geographies and across the fields, and this was really important, and to discuss blockchain related topics. And this is still, we are meeting every 2 weeks, and Fahad was I would say the driving force, and he says one of the founding members of this initiatives. And last, alphabetically, not least, Amy Whitaker. She is a professor of visual arts at New York University, and with a background in fine arts and social and political science, her research on frictions between art and business have led her to explore blockchain. And she's looking at blockchain as facilitator of new ways of fractional ownership in the art market. So welcome all of you. It is a pleasure to have you. And I want to start by asking Fahad, exactly about this, based on the fact on this initiative of CBER Forum. You aimed right from the beginning. The CBER Forum was aiming to bring together scholars from different disciplines working on blockchain. So, what advantages do you see of bringing those different fields together?
So first, Hannah, thank you for that introduction. I think there's a fair amount of embellishment in that there were a number of driving forces in the CBER Forum and a number of founding members, and of course, a number of organizers, including yourself, who organized a very nice session just a month ago. But to get to your question, I think this actually touches on something you were talking about in the break, which is that ultimately, for those of us researching on blockchain, which includes, of course, all the papers on this program that you put together, the questions actually touch upon skill sets that span across disciplines. And one of the unfortunate consequences of not having interdisciplinary interactions is that sometimes you have people coming to different conclusions because they're ignoring sort of different aspects of the same problem. They're looking at different institutional details and focusing on those. But so perhaps to make it a little bit more concrete, for example, I would say a lot of work in blockchain research, you can think of as fitting under the umbrella of how do we develop a permissionless blockchain proposal such that the blockchain would not be subjected to a lot of attacks with that are, let's say, meaningful, that would meaningfully impact the functioning of the blockchain, and that it wouldn't be subjected to that with a large frequency. And that's a very imprecise way of stating it. But the whole point is that if you start to dig into that, right, then you have to think about things like, well, what is the strategy space? What are the attack vectors, so to speak, right? But who exactly is, let's say, best equipped to think about what the right strategy space is? I would argue actually it's probably computer scientists. They're very good at thinking of bad things that could happen on blockchains. There are plenty of CS papers that sort of identify new attack vectors, right? I don't see very many economics papers identifying them. Frequently, economics papers pick up on attack vectors identified in CS and then sort of hone in on them. But it seems to me that if you're going to be thinking about a blockchain proposal that is sort of unlikely to be attacked in any way whatsoever, you really should be engaging with computer scientists to think about what are the sorts of things that could happen in specifying your strategy space. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that economists are irrelevant to the conversation, because as we know, just because something is feasible doesn't mean it's actually optimal, right? So there's a question of incentive compatibility where, maybe a microeconomist might be very useful. And the thing is, a lot of times the incentives run through things like prices. So for example, maybe part of what's being manipulated is the block reward, and the payoff for the block reward is of course also a function of the cryptocurrency price. So maybe some financial economists might have some thoughts on that, right? And of course, when we write models, we abstract from things. So if you abstract from everything that's out of your field and focus on everything that's inside your field, you may end up with one conclusion, and the people in the other field may end up with the opposite conclusion, because you've sort of abstracted away from exactly the opposite side of the coin. But at the end of the day, I would imagine for practitioners, the goal is the same, right? We just want essentially a blockchain that actually is a chain of blocks instead of, persistent forks with malintent. And so, let's put it, for the good of the practitioners, there's a lot of value in good faith interactions across these disciplines so that we can actually sort of get on the same page and solve these questions, which are not specific and territorial to our fields, but rather span across them and require skill sets, I think, and institutional knowledge that also spans across these fields.
Thank you. So for other panelists, which is not aside of Fahad, everybody here worked on other topics in our respective fields before getting interested in cryptocurrencies and blockchain. And I would like to ask you, what do you think that those new themes can bring to your fields, and what are the interesting new areas of study that they are opening up? And I would like to start with Ken on this topic.
Thank you, and thank you, Hannah, for organizing this, and everyone else. Well, I mean, I think it's pretty simple. In my case, I work on macroeconomics and monetary theory, and this is potentially reshaping macroeconomics and monetary theory. We don't quite know. I think there's a lot of interesting work and conjectures. So you have to think about it. So what really, you asked what got me into it. I actually started writing about the history of money. I have a 2016 book, and the last third of it's devoted to digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies. But I hadn't planned that when I started writing it. And I realized a lot of the issues I wanted to look at, classical issues, for example, the abuses of paper currency and uses of paper currency, it's just silly to be talking about it and not talking about the future. It's been, I think, in my field, and particularly with my interest, I've literally not just worked on monetary theory, I have worked on cash. And so, it's a topic that you have to think about. Now, I'll lastly say, one of the things looking I've certainly had the privilege of talking to computer scientists, although I think Jacob probably understands a lot more than I do. But, one thing I find in the space generally is people don't understand that many of the problems that blockchains being brought to bear on are classical problems, and maybe it's a better solution, maybe not, but it hasn't been regulated yet. And so I think the regulators are, I would say the smart money so far has been that the regulators are dumb, and but I don't know if that'll last forever. And I think that's something that a lot of people working in it don't quite understand, that there has to be some cohabitation here.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, Ken, that it's mostly the cryptocurrencies that are going to play this important role in changing cash, or CBDCs?
Well, who knows? I mean, so I'm guessing that cryptocurrencies will play a role in emerging markets in the third world countries that don't have this. The government doesn't have complete control of the state. That's going to play a role forever. But I think within advanced countries, it'll be tamed. And CBDCs are, a little part of that. I mean, I think it's a little bit of a distraction to talk about CBDCs as substituting for cryptocurrencies, because in some ways they're not so different, not nearly as different from the existing. But I will say, I recently was was on a judge for the Singapore Monetary Authority, had a competition to produce technologies for central bank digital currencies. And one really interesting thing I learned was the scale of the ambition of many of people looking at it, that they're not looking, many of the entrants were not just looking at replacing cash, they were looking at replacing the whole financial system integratively, and were trying to pitch their idea for a central bank digital currency as a sort of stepping stone to doing that.
Interesting. So, Amy, going back to the original question, what do you think that those new themes of blockchain and cryptocurrencies are going to bring to your field, and any interesting areas of study they open up?
Thank you also, Hannah, and everyone else. In my field, in the arts and the art market, one of the central concerns that is really shared with blockchain is a concern around provenance. And this goes back, in my personal case, to being part of an artist working group looking at what property meant for artists circa 2012 and the few years after. And then in the blockchain case, and I credit David Yermak, who was hosting the prior session, with the introduction to this paper, the 1991 paper by Haber and Stornetta laying out how to timestamp digital documents, is really about this core research question that unites all disciplines about how knowledge is known. I mean, how we know what is true in any field of endeavor. And their question was, how will we know what was true about the past when it's so easy to manipulate a digital file? And how will we know without trusting a central administrator? So provenance, the history of ownership and record keeping, is instrumental to the way artworks are sold. But I also think that that paper is emblematic of the interdisciplinarity of just the question itself before you start to add currencies and other ways that we know what's true and what's valuable. And in that case, that paper, they quote Juventus in the original Latin, the kind of who will guard the guards. There's a passage from the Rape of Lucrece about the passage of time. So that to me is where the arts come in, this record keeping around markets. And then in my own research, questions of equity in the sense of ownership and also inclusion. So conversations about how artists could use blockchain not only to receive a percentage of the proceeds if the value of their work goes up a lot over time, but also to develop governance systems or decentralized autonomous organizations where they can share those proceeds to pool risk across groups of artists, or also to designate those proceeds to third parties like charities.
So do you have any thought about why blockchain would be better than any like just centralized database that would be a co-op of all the artists?
I mean, it's such a great question. I think the core question is, if you trust a central authority, that takes the trust out of the record itself. And in the arts in particular, and I know this manifests differently in a lot of fields, there's so much opacity and so much close guarding of records. There's so much privacy that's normed in. I think the fact that the kind of governance model where everyone can access the record equally and there's transparency is important and radical to the change in the power structure. Right now, artists have so little power in markets, even though markets depend on artists and the arts, that the blockchain is important for that piece. The sort of, how do you trust your transcript without a registrar, or a bank record without a bank? I think that's especially important when we're talking about a seismic shift in the power dynamic. Just for artists to be able to articulate and claim those contracts is very hard in a world with central authorities, because the central authorities are entrenched on the market and not the artist side.
So forced transparency in a way. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a great question. I think it's always important to ask that.
Hey, let me move to Jacob about the themes, how the blockchain and cryptocurrency themes are entering your field, and what new areas of study they open up.
So first, thank you everybody, and I'm mostly here to listen. Really interesting. I actually got interested in Bitcoin originally because my co-author Guru Huberman stepped into my office and forced me to learn about Bitcoin, and he was very persistent. And initially, we thought it's a really interesting technology, but we only started writing a paper once we realized that there's something new and useful about it. We kind of figured, oh, there's a new thing here. And the first thing that we thought was like, there's a lot of things we don't understand. We don't understand what makes it money or not. And that's something that I will leave to Ken to talk about. I'm not by any means able to talk about those things. But there are some aspects of Bitcoin that give you a very desirable economic structure, namely the fact that you don't have a monopolist, you don't have somebody in charge. There's a lot of reasons why people don't like people in charge, but like a very economic sound one is that monopolists can be harmful. And we started thinking about how this design paradigm actually gives you new economic properties. And that's what made it interesting for us. The fact that you can design systems with new properties that can be really economically desirable. You can facilitate new forms of competitions or transparency, as Amy talked about. And I think those are really, really interesting and important. And I should mention that it's not just the blockchain itself. One of the things that I came to appreciate is also just cryptography. Like some of the technologies that have been around for a very long time are very useful. And maybe we should talk not just about the blockchain technology, but also for applications to cryptography that the computer science have been developing, and we should be thinking about using more widely.
So I do hope that this conference is also going to encourage economists to think more carefully about other topics that computer scientists are developing from the incentive point of view. But Jacob, can you also kind of tell us a little bit about this platform design with cryptocurrencies as possible new area to study?
Yeah, so I think that this is a very interdisciplinary field of work, as many of you noted already. And I think that there's like multiple reasons why you really need it to be interdisciplinary. First is that the goals are given by economics. Like what properties you want the systems to have is just a platform. The user should not really know whether you're using blockchain or something else. Just like when I go now on Amazon, I don't know how they're running Amazon. But blockchain or decentralized technologies can be very useful because it allows you to have different properties, like different governance of this platform. And in order to implement those things, of course, you need to interact a lot with the computer science aspects of this. You need to understand what you can implement. And what you can implement is really intertwined with what you can incentivize. So a really nice example of this, that's of course everybody knows, is that Bitcoin could not function without a proof of work that pays miners. But in order to pay miners, you need to have something valuable to pay with. But the thing is only valuable if the thing that it sits on, the blockchain, is actually working. So you have this intertwined problem. In order to have this record keeping to be functional, I need to have store of value. And in order to have store of value, I need to have fractional record keeping. And the Nakamoto consensus protocol kind of comes up with a solution that bootstraps both of those together. But it's one of those examples where like the solution must have both economics as well as computer science elements joined together to create something that's useful.
Thank you. So I think that, Maria, this is like a perfect segue to your perspective. And we think of blockchain as kind of coming from computer science, but even in computer science, it is a novel theme. So what changed in computer science, and what are new areas opened up?
Okay, first of all, thank you, Hannah, for the invitation. Thank you to all of you for participating to this conference. So I cannot talk about all the computer science. So I will give I will give just my perspective. So I am a humble researcher in distributed systems, fault-tolerant and distributed systems. So for me, the switch from other distributed systems to blockchain was not so dramatic as for other people. So in early 2000, I was investigating already peer-to-peer systems. And all of you know that one of the ingredients of blockchains are also peer-to-peer systems. So I will give you my, how to say, my history with blockchains. So I was introduced to blockchains by Juan Gary. He is a cryptographer, but he has also a strong background in distributed systems. And he gave a talk around his work on Bitcoin backbone protocol, which is one of the papers that I think most of you read. And starting with this talk in particular, I say, okay, what an interesting area. And as Saleh said before, I was how to say, someone that work on fault tolerance aspects, meaning that we are the people that think to bad things that can happen in the system. And when one of my friends asked me in early, let's say 2016, what do you think about Bitcoin? I said, this system cannot work. And still today, I don't understand how this system works, why the system works. From technical point of view, from distributed system point of view, this system cannot work. Okay, so maybe I said too much, but this is my point of view. So now coming back to your question, what blockchains brought to distributed system in particular? Well, a lot of things. First of all, blockchain needs, as all of you said, blockchain needs an interdisciplinarity knowledge. So it's a mix of distributed system, fault tolerance, crypto, economics, and this interdisciplinarity was never studied in distributed systems. So we are very very close to our area. We know how to design consensus algorithms. We know how to prove the correctness of these algorithms. But till the arrival of blockchain on the stage, people didn't thought to how to include in our traditional models, for instance, the rationality of users' behavior, to cross the research with people that are designing cryptographic tools. So blockchain brought a lot of new problems, and we didn't respond to all these new problems. And one of them, how to say, one of the challenge today in distributed system with respect to blockchain is to provide a complete formalization of all the abstractions that have been defined in so far in blockchain. So we know how to formalize traditional distributed systems. So there are a lot of works around this topic. We know that in crypto area there are models that formalize cryptographic tools, but the problem is that never ever till today people thought how to bring together these models and to connect them, because the language, even the language, the formalization language is not the same. So I think that in at least from the computer science point of view, putting together all these models in order to at least try to capture the properties of blockchains is an interesting challenge.
And
so, yeah.
And would you say that it encouraged and prompted computer scientists to also step out of this computer science silo and reach out to other disciplines?
Oh, this is really something that is very new, and it was very fast with the appearance of the blockchain. So I give you just one other example. So when peer-to-peer system appeared in the area of computer science, most of the people that work in distributed systems and in computer science in general said, okay, it's nothing new. And actually, most of the work that has been done by computer scientists in peer-to-peer system is obsolete. So it was a peak of hype of research or academic research in peer-to-peer system that ended around 2006, I would say. And then silence till the appearance of blockchain, where again people said, okay, now it's nice to work also in peer-to-peer systems, because it's connected to something that has a real economical interest. Industrial people invest a lot in blockchain, and then this, in some sense, incentivized people from computer science to work in blockchain. But it's quite new, and it was a phenomenon that was very fast. Through 3-4 years, practically half of the community, at least in distributed systems, started to be interested in blockchains. And it was the same for the networking people, for the people that are working in, for instance, artificial intelligence and so on. So it was very, very fast, contrary to what happened in 20 years ago in peer-to-peer systems.
So Maria, you said something interesting, that it was really fast, and I have heard comparisons that or comments that in blockchain is like, in blockchain, years run like dog years. I know 1 year is worth 7 years of development, because everybody sees that it runs so fast. I think that the development in blockchain topics is so fast exactly because it touches on so many fields, and there is input from many different fields and many different perspectives. And I mean, all of us here are, and also all of us in the audience as well, we are kind of enthusiastic about this topic. We do find it worthwhile to research. We see areas of research that it opens up, but at the same time, I'm sure that each one of you has faced challenges from traditionalists in the field, saying, at least 2 years ago, saying that blockchain is a fad, cryptocurrencies are not, well, they cannot work. Like Maria said, Bitcoin should not be working, and somehow it is. It's not going to last. It's not worth researching. Right, so there's a difference. It may not last and may still be worth researching, but many people said it's not worth researching. So what were the challenges that you have heard in your particular fields, and what type of arguments are effective in convincing people that it is a worthwhile area to study? And I would like to circle back to Fahad.
Well, actually, so, let me put it this way. So I'm not sure I was actually all that effective at convincing people back when I was a PhD student. Hannah, of course, you were working on blockchain before anybody. So you had a very, I'm sure you tried to convince the same people at NYU, and I'm not sure how successful you were either. But what I found actually is that the biggest thing that has been persuasive is not so much anything I say in particular, but rather time. I think a lot of people thought that this was just going to disappear. And the fact that it doesn't, I think at a minimum, as researchers, should push us and force us to say, okay, why? Is it, Bitcoin in 2012, maybe you say, well, it's crazy and all of that, but with it sort of at near all-time highs 10 years later, I think at some point there's the need, the intellectual curiosity at a minimum, to go, well, what is it that's at least sustained it for 10 years? Certainly it doesn't imply that it's going to persist beyond that point, but I found that just the passage of time and the fact that it has only gotten more relevant, at least to practitioners, has been perhaps the most persuasive thing. And at this point, there's of course a ton of people who are interested in blockchain and want to understand it better and better. So I found the easier thing to do is to focus on the people who are interested rather than trying to convince the holdouts.
And Ken, what is your experience? Although you may not experience as much pushback as young researchers do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly the opposite in that you talk to graduate students and young people, and they're just totally excited by it, although they're confused by it and don't know. So I don't think that's an issue. I mean, I do come from it from a different world of also thinking about how would the Federal Reserve think about this? How would regulators think about it? I have long, had contacts with regulators all over the world, or sort of coming to grips with where this would go. And they're different. There are some who think you should ban it, and there's some who think, well, Singapore is an example. I think Singapore sees itself as the Switzerland of the digital currencies, and if this is going to keep going, we're going to be the ones who are first. So it's been very interesting. I mean, I have been surprised by how confused the regulators are. I'm not surprised that politicians are confused. That's watch when Mark Zuckerberg testifies in Congress. It's just hysterical. But it's moved very slowly. And I mean, it's sort of one change I've had is I do believe that in the long run in advanced economies, you have to you can't allow large pseudonymous transactions. It has to be something that, meets the same standards as other things. But if that's going to take 30 years to do, it means that, something like Bitcoin has a lot of room to run. I mean, if I had mentioned 10 years, maybe it's over. You think of fossil fuels. Well, there are these oil companies that are worth a fortune from their fossil fuels. Even we know we're going to get rid of them. And so I've certainly learned that the time span's much longer. And then in my own work, I'm just impressed at all the uses people find for it. I mean, the idea that Bitcoin's not used for anything, it's not used in transactions, I think is just patently wrong. So many economists, I'd even say, if you did a poll at the American Economic Association, and again, Jacob may have more experience with this, but I would guess 90% of them, 95% of them would say it's a pure speculative bubble. There's no fundamental use. And I think that's totally misconceived. It may be that if it's regulated, the use would go down a lot, but it's not true that there's no use. And it's, I don't need to explain it to this group, but it's surprising how far behind people are in that. And again, it's you were talking about dog years. It just moves so fast.
Amy.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I say this with a lot of respect for economics and finance, fields I work in and teach in. It's hard to describe the skepticism toward both within some parts of the arts, alongside the deep embrace of markets in some other parts of the arts, but in a rhetoric that Olav Veltis describes as cultural camouflage, of pretending not to talk about money. So I think in that context, the way blockchain is perceived is really varied. I mentioned coming to it through an artist working group looking at property. I used to affectionately refer to that group as Marxists and cynics after a joke someone made when I explained that I had an MBA as well as an art degree. And so I think that what you see on the part of, let's say, curators and museum directors is a lot of skepticism. People say things to me like, I feel old, quote unquote, from very vital retired museum director. There's a lot of change in the power dynamic of tastemaking. When the Beeple Every Day's work sold for $69 million, 91% of the bidders were new to the auction house. So there's an enormous change in who's deciding what's valuable potentially. And then on the artist side, I think there are a lot of artists who are technologists who've been working in it for a long time. And there are also a lot of artists who their market skepticism is activated by the sort of speculative NFT sales, but they're also doing a lot of structural work, kind of solidarity economy work underneath that. So I would say maybe the two things that I find most interesting to think about are perhaps the contributions that come about from people's skepticism are the ways in which one, blockchain and this whole ecosystem is a bit of an art project that we all live inside of. So watching people, whether it's regulators or politicians or others, adopt a critic standpoint and just go, this is never going to work, or let me talk about every small thing that's wrong with it, as opposed to the vulnerability of an artist position of, well, this is pretty imperfect and fledgling, but how can we direct it and build it into something interesting? And then also the way in which, I remember when ICOs first came on the scene and NFTs as well, that I had this uncanny feeling like, gosh, I've seen this before. It doesn't make sense to me. And it's also familiar. And it's because the same lack of an ability to value things analytically and systematically, discounted cash flow and otherwise, is the way the art market is. So there may be some ways in which systems develop in the arts that might be useful outside, but I think to borrow from that, all happy families are happy and alike, and I'm paraphrasing, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. I think there's a great variety of skepticism, and I'm constantly surprised by the creativity of approach people have to not enjoying it. And I think also, maybe because the arts, there's such a history of this artist is the most important artist in the history of time, people are especially allergic to the exuberance and overconfidence with which blockchain is sometimes presented. But I think a lot of people are very, very interested in it, not just because NFTs are all the market rage, but otherwise. So I'm really curious to hear what other people are finding.
Yeah, interesting. So, Jacob, you did face a lot of skepticism with your first paper on the monopoly without monopolists.
So, on a personal note, like personal experience, that we thought we were writing a paper about Bitcoin and people will be very excited to understand this new thing, and it turns out not to be the case at all. Like that, people, if anything, were off-put by this, and although kind of like I would have preferred, of course, to have a much more welcoming approach, I also think that the skepticism has its benefits, right? Because it pushes you to say, why is this making a contribution? What is really new about this? And we actually changed the presentation to say, look, like that's, even if you don't care about Bitcoin itself, payments are at almost 2 trillion worldwide market. And payment processing is hugely inefficient in many ways. You can think of like the valuations of payment processing companies from Visa to Plaid and Stripe. And you can see of all sorts of regulations all over the world. There's a lot of problems that are really real problems that even if you don't care about blockchain itself, you may be interested in those problems and think that those important problems which we're thinking about. And blockchain just happens to be one of the potential solutions that is worth considering. But beside that, I think that there's also beyond the narrow kind of like helpful, the narrow kind of like it can be helpful for problem X or for problem Y. I think that blockchain or like decentralized system in generally kind of brings up like the fundamental question of economics in a way, right? Like the fundamental question of economics to me is how can we get different people to work together to create something together as one, which is essentially what you're trying to do in distributed systems. You're trying to get multiple computers to act as one computer to collaborate together. And blockchain just piles up a bunch more things to this. We want to create a platform together. We want to commerce together. We want to have a payment system. All those different wonderful things, we want to run them together. And of course, we know how to do those things with somebody in charge. And I think that's another big theme of economics. Do we need somebody in charge? Do we operate through markets or through controlled economies? In that sense, like the questions that we're asking when we ask about blockchain technology are really fundamental economic questions.
And I mean, it's kind of interesting that what seems to be working. It's showing that they are fundamentally economics questions, and what to Fahad's point, that time is kind of showing the importance through money, right? There is high valuation, lots of money flowing in, and that kind of convinces skeptics that maybe it is a worthwhile area to study, one way or the other. I'm personally surprised that there was also resistance. What Maria is saying, resistance in computer science to study this. So you felt the resistance, and what were the arguments that are working to show that it's worthwhile?
Well, the resistance was not exactly to the blockchain, but it was merely 20 years ago to peer-to-peer systems. I was surprised that blockchain was really very quickly adopted by the computer scientists, while 20 years ago, they didn't want to even work or follow the research in peer-to-peer systems. And I think that the element that make computer scientists to be so eager to understand this technology, and in particular distributed system people, is the fact that the first two blockchains, Bitcoin and Ethereum, claimed that they propose a solution for consensus, which from the distributed system, fault-tolerant distributed perspective, is an impossible problem to solve in asynchronous systems. Well, and this is very intriguing. So there were 40 years of research around these impossibility results, and suddenly some people that were not scientists claimed that they discovered the Holy Grail. And actually, most of the distributed system people try to, okay, let's understand how this blockchain system work, and let's try to formalize a little bit things in order to not make the industry people think that they are facing a miracle technology. So I think that this is the point that push quickly people from our community to study blockchains, and okay, to say, okay, you have permissionless blockchain where the guarantees are not so high, but look also that with all our knowledge that we accumulated during 40 years of research in distributed system, we can build systems that are better than what the market uses today. So yeah, in distributed systems in particular, I didn't feel the resistance of the researchers to go into the study of blockchains.
I like what you mentioned about being careful or beware of miracle technologies, right? Because it's typically, if something promises to be a miracle, we should be suspicious. So studying miracle technologies is very much awarded, and there's a lot of misconception about the technology, and there is still, it brings me to the next to our next question or set of questions, is that there is still a disconnect in how blockchain is perceived by computer science, by economics, by finance, by the Fed, by macroeconomists. So I wanted to kind of run a quick exercise, and I wanted to ask each one of you, what, in your own words, what is the definition of blockchain? Because just, as probably people in the audience are aware, we don't really have a universal and agreed upon definition of what blockchain is and what is not. So I would like to hear from each one of you, and circle back to Fahad.
So I'll be quick. I'll say it's just a hash link database, which means it's going to encapsulate what Haber and Stornetta were talking about. It's going to encapsulate Bitcoin. It's going to encapsulate Ethereum, which isn't really about money and currency and so on. But anything that pertains to a hash-linked database, I'll call that a blockchain.
Okay, Amy?
Yeah, I tend to explain it in stories, the Haber and Stornetta story, or metaphors like the university with transcripts but no registrar. And I tend to talk about if you own a real work of art, it's non-fungible. Okay, so a digital work, they're all fungible. Now what if you make them non-fungible, sort of stepwise?
Okay, I mean, they are not already not agreeing, not exactly the same, right? Ken, what is your definition of blockchain?
I'm not sure I'm ever called upon to make one, but certainly the decentralized nature of it is what fascinates people. In the financial system, we're worried that it could get hacked, that we have these long-standing systems, but eventually tools get better, and we just weren't ready at a scale you can't imagine. And I think, you know, people looked at this as maybe a way to sort of taper the downside of that, the fact that it's decentralized, that it's just harder to hack. And if that's true, by the way. So that's I think been you know, the core fascination that I've had with it.
And this is a really nice example of different definitions that are not necessarily aligned, because Fahad's definition does not include decentralization. It's just hash linked database, and decentralization does not need to require the just one line of a hash linked database. So there are different current solution would fall or not fall into this definition. But let's keep going. Jacob, what is your definition of blockchain?
So I'm thinking about the definition as an economist. I would actually not define blockchain as is. It's like I just think of it as what the computer scientists call an API. What does it give me? And I think important properties that I would like to include is something like free entry, for lack of a better word. Anybody can be part of the system. There's nothing that blocks you from being part of the operating of the system. Another is like safety and liveness, like the properties that you want, like of the database, of the distributed system properties, under what conditions do you get them? I think those are the things that I would focus on, and whether it's established by one data set or another is something that I would leave to the computer scientist. As an economist, I want to know what properties I get.
Okay, but it also means that some of the earlier permissionless systems would fall into your definition of blockchain, right? BitTorrent would probably fall there as well, even though it predates blockchain, right? It's distributed, permissionless, and relatively secure.
It depends for what context you're looking at. Like if you think about it as a marketplace, sure, like it's a marketplace. It doesn't have consistency in the same way, right? It doesn't have the safety. The big difference between BitTorrent and like blockchain is that I can get a file, but I don't know if I'm getting the most recent version of it, and there's no way of verifying it. One kind of agreed upon version of a file. If that's not important for your application, that's like that will serve the purpose too.
Okay, and Maria, what is your definition of blockchain?
Well, it's very difficult to give a definition. As Jacob said, maybe we should just highlight properties. So I will highlight just the fact that we are facing to a technology that is would like to be secure, decentralized, and to work in a dynamic environment. I think that the three words that would describe this technology would be security, dynamicity, and decentralization. And well, in distributed system, we already had what is called a shared register abstraction, but yeah, blockchain is like a shared register, an augmented shared register with security and dynamicity.
Right. So yeah, so thank you very much for all those definitions. I think it highlights the this aspect of the aspect of this field. It's new, dynamic. It develops much quicker than anything else we have seen before, and at the same time, it's not really clear what we are studying. I mean, it may be clear to each one of us, but not necessarily across the board. And I think this also is fascinating and may be adding to the dynamic nature of the field. So before we wrap up, I wanted to kind of ask, what is the biggest myth about your own discipline that you have heard from experts in other disciplines? Let's kind of tackle this one, and let me circle back to Fahad.
I'm not sure I have a good myth in mind here, so let me pass it along actually.
Okay, Ken.
I mean, I don't even know where to start on that question, to be honest. It certainly, just to say something bland, I mean, it's certainly clearly the case. I see examples of hearing ideas from new crypto startups and others which are patently ignorant about economics. They're problems we've done before and seen before, and they have no idea, and they're economic issues they don't understand. And on the other hand, we economists need to, sometimes we're sort of not sure what's doable. But I'll just give an example that's important to me, which is I think you want to allow small transactions that are completely anonymous, but you don't want to allow large transactions that can't be audited easily, not just in principle, but easily. And yeah, I hear answers from people in computer science or startups that are working on this, but they don't know that there are classical problems on this that they haven't thought about. They think they have an answer, but they don't have an answer. But that's one to this group. I'll say we really want a robust answer. I mean, I think that's a real hurdle to clearing regulation and normalizing blockchain, at least in the currency area, is how do you, in a robust way so that it can't be gamed, allow $1,000 transaction, but not $1 million transaction. $1,000 action, you just can't audit any more easily than cash for $1,000, but for $1 million, it's reasonably easy.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, yes, there is a lot of misunderstanding and repetition, reinventing of the wheel, great to hear your perspective. And Amy, I think there's a lot of misperception with economics.
Yeah, how much time do you have? I guess where I would start is just to say there are a lot of people who think markets are bad. They think that being interested in markets is a form of rapacious capitalism. And I think what complicates it is there are edges of that have truth, that it is quite hard to apply economics to art because the motivation for profit is not usually present, and also because value of art is known often so slowly and messily over time, where many people disagree on what's valuable, that price and value are often kind of out of alignment, and therefore the economic logic sometimes doesn't hold, and you're into an investment logic of taking risk and maybe getting a return. So what I see is that artists dismiss markets and judge them sometimes so much that they're actually getting taken advantage of by them, and that some people perceive NFTs to be about money and markets, and they're actually, I think, also about politics and governance and participation and equity. And the sort of questions, I think maybe, Jacob, you were saying this earlier, this or Fahad, the logic of economics kind of underneath these systems. And I would say there's also this question of what's the logic of politics underneath these systems in terms of participation and kind of governance models and how we choose to develop those. And I'm sure there are lots and lots of other misunderstandings, but I mean, that's one that I experienced really viscerally. I went to art school with an MBA, and I write about artists and art markets, you know, where you have your valiant 19 whole data points that you've spent a lot of time in archives finding, and you need to have like 30,000 to write the paper. So I think there's just a lot of interesting friction that, you know, demands curiosity, not judgment, between how things are known and quantifying fields. You know, when it is that you can find a perfect answer analytically, but maybe the data set actually is a little bit detached from the truth, or you know, when everybody agrees there's one bad painting, but nobody agrees which one it is. So that would be my offering to your question.
Yeah, thank you. And Jacob?
Following on Ken, I think there's a long list here, but I'll give one kind of parable that I think is very helpful for a lot of things, which is like the stone soup story, that the poor traveler comes to a rich person's house and tries to convince him to feed him. And the rich person does not want to feed him, but like the poor traveler says, I'll teach you how to make a soup from a stone. And like, okay, they get excited, and like, how do you do this? You take a big pot, you put the stone in, and then obviously you need to add water and vegetables and spices and chicken and all of this, and boil it for a while, and you get a stone soup. And I think this is prevalent in a lot of applications, so-called, of blockchain in the space, both in the private sector, but also sometimes in academic circles too, where you just take a problem that is a hard economic problem for a while, and you just put a blockchain on it, and you imagine like suddenly people don't cheat or people don't lie because you put a blockchain somewhere in the process. And, you know, I think that's a misconception that we should avoid.
Yeah, a miracle technology, right? What Maria said. So Maria, I mean, that is one myth, but any other myth about computer science that you have heard from economists or other fields?
Well, no, I just wanted to talk about the fact that so we are assisting to thousands of blockchains that appear on the market today, and if I were, for instance, an artist, and I would try to pick one of these blockchains for my application, to be honest, I will not be able to choose one that would offer me strong guarantees. So I think that the problem now in the blockchain is that every blockchain it's claiming that it's offering the same guarantees as distributed databases offered in a previous years, which is not the case. But there is, how to say, there is so the truth, it's very hard to, in all these white papers that describe, each one of them describes a new blockchain that guarantees a lot of properties, and finally, so I think that the job of our job now is to really go inside all these technologies, or all these examples of technologies, and to try to establish the academic truth, because most of them have been designed by people that do not have an academic background or a very little academic background. They use terms that are very well defined in academics, but they just pick the some notions without understanding the definitions.
Yeah, so I think I also think that one of the biggest myths around blockchain generally is that blockchain generically guarantees immutability and security without any trusted third party algorithmically, right? It's cryptographically assured. And we know that this is not true at any level.
Not for all of them, but it's very difficult for someone that has no scientific background to make the choice between two technologies that claim both of them that they are offering the same guarantees as a distributed database, classical distributed database. It's very difficult.
Okay, so I would like to thank each one of you and all of you. I was an excellent panel, and have learned a lot and about the agreements and disagreements in the field. Thank you very much, and I hope everybody else will join me in thanking you. And